In this video, we are going to learn about rendering lists in React. So let's say there is a component and name Alex is passed, then hello Alex should be printed, right? So that is working fine. But we already saw that, let's say we have a variable, let's say ABC, and it is something, let's say 34. Okay, now we can render this one variable ABC like this, so that 34 is printed. That is fine, but I wanted to show you that we can render lists also. So we can have ARR, and let's say this is something, let's say hello world. Okay, and then in a similar manner we can use directly array here, and turns out it is also rendered. Now let's have a look at how this is rendered. So you can see that hello and world, these two strings are separately rendered. Okay, and in fact even if you print numbers, let's say 1 2 3 4 whatever, so you'll see that they're also rendered as strings. So essentially these are converted into strings, and everything which is inside array is rendered in string fashion automatically, whatever is inside the array. Okay, but this is not much interesting, right? Because if we wanted to simply render like this, then we would have just concatenated it, right? So something better would be rather than this, something better would have directly done ourselves, right? Something like let's say arr dot join, and let's separate it by space, right? So this would be much better if we wanted to do something like this. But just wanted to show you that if even if there is an array, it is directly rendered. Okay, let's take something interesting. So let's say 1 2 3 is some array, and let's name it items. Okay, and obviously if we directly render it here, then this will be available here. That is fine as 1 2 3 separately. But right now we want to do something more interesting. So let's say we are not interested in simply printing it like this. Rather, we are interested in, let's say, creating elements which are created out of this 1 2 3. Okay, so essentially I'll do that here, but firstly let me show you here only. So let's say instead of this we are having just a list of JSX elements. So we know that JSX elements are also expressions, right? So they can be written like this. So let's say A1 is there, and similarly 2 3 is there, right? So you can see that this thing is printed, which means that these three elements are there in an array, and they are printed as soon as we simply print that array, automatically this gets printed. Okay, but just observe that earlier we were not getting any warning. Right now we are getting a warning that each child in the list should have a unique key property. Okay, now what is this? So we'll discuss this in more detail, but right now just wanted to highlight you that earlier, when like primitive types like this or hello world or anything like strings or numbers, those things were printed, then this warning was not coming. This warning specifically comes when you are trying to render JSX elements. Okay, so right now you can clearly see that this thing is JSX element. So they are saying that you should have something like a key prop inside the JSX each child. Okay, so what they are saying is that you should have something like this: key is equal to, and then you can provide any unique number. Okay, so let's say this is anything. This can be 0 or 1 2, or you can have any unique number. So let's say ASD, PQR, anything. Okay, So as long as everything is unique, this works fine. So you'll see that now there is no warning. However, just wanted to tell you that let's say two of them are same, then you will still get warning that the two children are having the same key. Now why this key is important, we will come to it after some time in this same video, but just wanted to highlight you that this thing is required by React. Okay, so again let's have simply 0 1 2 for now for simplicity, and you can see that it is being rendered as 3 div elements. Okay, so earlier simply whatever primitive types you passed, that was simply passed as a strings, but now since it is a proper JSX element, they are rendered as proper HTML elements inside the DOM. Okay, so that is fine. We did this in this manner, but turns out that why are we doing like this? Even if we simply have an array containing, let's say, some items, then we can transform this into something like this directly using, let's say, something like map or something, right? So so we can do that. Before we do that, let me highlight you one more thing, that we are passing key is equal to 0, right? But when these are rendered, you can see that that key is equal to whatever thing was there, that thing is not available here, right? Which means that that is specifically for React. If you want to properly pass ID, so let's say I want to pass this ID 1, then you have to have some other any other name you can give, but that name what you give, that only gets passed. You can see that div ID is equal to 1, this gets passed, but key does not get passed. Anyways, if you require them, then you should pass them separately. Right now the idea is just to show you that how we can use map to transform this into this. Okay, so let's comment this and let's start with this thing. Okay, so right now let's call it nums, and right now we are going to create our items from nums. And how do we do that? We can simply do nums dot map, where I'll take each num and map it to a JSX element div. Inside that I'm going to render num. So this will give me items, and that items is rendered. So you can see that it works fine like this also. But again you can see that again warning is coming because we have not put key. Okay, so the idea of key is that when there is an array having multiple JSX elements, okay, we know that that JSX is going to be transformed into HTML DOM. But before React does that, React has its own virtual DOM, and there it tries to maintain a state of each element, so that later if something gets updated, then React can identify that which element to update. Now if you pass key, then React can do that in an optimized manner. Okay, so that's why it gives warning, though even though this looks like it is working, but for that optimization purpose key is needed. Now right now what should be key? So turns out that your data should have their own ID, which we, for that we'll take another example in some time. But right now there is one way you can understand is that okay, I know that the second argument of map gives me index. So if I take this second argument I know that that gives me index. Index means index of the array, in index of this item in the array which is provided, which means that what is the index of this num in this nums array. Okay, so obviously the index will be 0 1 2 onwards, right? So that can be passed here, and then you can see that that warning goes away. Okay, so this is fine, but let me warn you that this should be used as a last resort. When you don't have any unique identifier in itself in your data, then only you should use something like this. Later we'll see an example where why using indices as keys might be problematic in some cases. However, in most of the cases it works fine, but in some cases that might be giving us some problems, and that's why you should use it as a last resort. Many programmers just directly, whenever this warning comes, directly use indices as the keys, but ideally it should be coming in the data. Whatever is the unique identifier, that should be coming in the data itself rather than you doing it using index. Okay, so we'll take an example soon, but for now this is working fine. Okay, that's fine. Now obviously, if we are able to do this thing, then we could very well take this whole thing, and rather than creating a separate variable, we could have done something like this also, isn't it? Okay, because anyways, like any expression we can write inside curly braces inside JSX also, right? So this thing will work as it is. So you can see that this thing is also working fine. Okay, so now let's take another example where which should be more intuitive, like why we are just rendering 1 to 3, right? So let's say there's a list ul, and inside that we are rendering this as li elements, which means that rather than div, this is now li, and rest everything will be same. You have to use keys, and the general rule of thumb is that whenever you are iterating over array, then the outermost element of the array on which the elements are being created, that should have key. We'll go in the somewhat detail in the later in this video. Okay, so this will do what? There is a ul tag, right, and inside that li items are there, so it will print a list, and you can clearly see that how the DOM is structured. ul was there, and inside that 3 li items, each having 1, 2 and 3 is rendered, and that's why a bulleted list with 1, 2, 3 is printed. Okay, so this is what we have seen. Okay, now let's try to do one thing, that one by one let's try to create some sort of component. So first let's try to do something like rather than we doing it ourselves. Okay, can we so this thing right now it is very much simple, right? But it can become somewhat complicated, right, later. But even what for this simple JSX, let's try to create a component. Now what is a component? Component returns a JSX, right? So if this JSX is there, then this can also be replaced using some other component. So let's create some other component. Let's call it list item. And again, this is a normal component. It has props. Okay, and then instead of this, we are using list item here. Okay, and we are returning this. Now this key is equal to I. What is this? This I is not available here, right? Okay, and this num is basically you have to pass it, right? So whatever num is there, so you have to take this and pass it appropriately, which means that let's say num is equal to num. Okay, then inside props num is passed. Okay, so I can replace this with props dot num. Okay, now you can see that still it is working fine, right? But we are getting this again this unique key means each of the elements should have a key prop. Now the question is that where should I put this key? Should I put it here or should I put it here? Turns out that you have to put it here. Even if you put here, then also warning will keep on coming, because inside the JSX, what is the outermost loop iterating and rendering the JSX elements? This one, right? Which means that whenever any map or whenever you are iterating through an array and rendering a list of, and that's what this video is about, rendering list inside React. Okay, whenever you are rendering, then the outermost components which are part of the array, that should have key. Okay, so here If you have key, that will not remove the. So how you can put key here? Let's take the same thing, whatever 1 2 3 is passed. Let's make the same thing key, just for simplicity. We'll see that still warning has not gone, right? Which means that you have to pass here key. And what we can use key? We can use simply that I for now as key. And now you can see that the warning has gone. Again, to illustrate that this is needed, this is not needed. So even if I remove key from there, you can see that no warning is coming. Okay, so you need to put key here. So that is the second thing. Now let's do one more thing. Okay, so rather than having just list item as the component, let's also have a higher level component that the whole list items, this thing, this thing is a component, let's say. Okay, now this whole thing can also be a component. Okay, so let's have that. Let's name that let's say list items. This is a collection of list items. Okay, so what we can do is that rather than list this thing, what we are doing, we are directly rendering this list items directly, and from here we can return this thing. What are we returning? We are simply returning an array. But now this nums is not defined because nums was defined here, right? So we have to pass this nums. Okay, and now inside props it is available. So props.nums. And now you can see that it is still working. And again, the idea is same, that the normal rule of thumb is that elements inside map, directly inside map, need keys. Okay, so that's why it is provided here. However, now we have so right now I'm just oversimplifying it. It is not needed for one line or for this small sort of small components. It is not needed, but just wanted to illustrate you that you can refactor your JSX code and while you are rendering lists in any fashion which you want. Okay, so once you definitely and again you can do one more level of grouping, right? So let's say I have something like my list, and now this thing is the whole list. So you can see here they are just the items, that's the li items, because this iterates over list item and each list item is just an li, but ul is still outside, right? So again you can have something something like this also, where you return this whole thing, okay, and instead of this you are simply saying my list. Okay, and rather you are returning this. And again nums is not provided, so rather you should pass nums from here. Now it will be available as part of props. Let's indent it, and now you can see that this thing is also working fine, right? So yeah, it's just I just wanted to show by refactoring, but for more complicated, so let's say this is like 50 lines, this is like 20 lines, this is like 10 lines or whatever, then you could do this sort of restructuring. But if things are simple and you can understand directly on your own, then it's better to simply use this directly rather than separately creating components, right? Even list items is not necessary if we are aware that we can understand this thing, right? This is also not necessary if it is clear. Okay, and now okay, and obviously it is going to be simply num, and this is not needed, and yeah, it will give that warning because here key is not provided. Okay, so I have collapsed everything else, but now you have an idea, right, that you could have refactored it. Anyways, it works fine as expected. So now we have seen all the ways in which these things can be done. Now let's try to do something like this, that let's say these nums are not static, rather it is dynamic, which means that it keeps on changing. Okay, now this is a static, so if it is static then it could be defined here, or if it is somewhat dynamic but static with respect to component, but this can be dynamic and coming from outside, which means that let's say the outer component, this thing is passing nums, so from here you are passing props as nums, and then here you are using just props.nums. That also you can do, right? But right now we are going to see an example where this nums is sort of a, let's say, state variable inside this component itself, and let's say on some button click or something, this array keeps on modifying, and if it keeps on modifying, then our expectation is that this list also should be modifying. Okay, so how we can simulate that? Rather than this, we can use state, and in that we have nums, and let's say set nums, which is going to be our setter for nums, and whatever is the initial value 1 2 3, this is starting from here. So now you have an idea, right, that nums earlier was a static thing. Now it is initialized with that static thing whatever was there, but now it can change. If I call set nums with a different array, then nums will be a different thing. Okay, but right now it should work as it is because I have not changed anything. Right now let's try to change something. So so how can we do that? Firstly, what we can do is that we can have uh, let's say a button is there. Okay, and that button is, let's say a button is here, or let's say at the end there is a button. Okay, and what we are doing is that when this thing gets called, let's say on click, then what we are doing is that we are calling some, let's say, click handler. Okay, and this click handler is defined here. Okay, and what it does a very simple thing. It just calls this set nums with some different array. So let's say instead of 1 2 3, it is, let's say, 4 5 6 or 3 4 5. Okay, so now you can see that it's 1 2 3, and when I click then it becomes 3 4 5. Okay, but this is like complete modification. Let's modify based on the previous nums only. So obviously we can do something like something like this also. So let's say I spread nums and then add, let's say, 4, and earlier it was 1 2 3, and now 4 is added. Okay, on clicking, but this is like not correct way, we already know, right? What should be ideally done? Ideally what should be done, we should use our own array, which means that the previous version of nums, and then that is spread and added, right? So whenever your new variable, new state variable depends on the previous variable, then you should use arrow function style rather than this style. Okay, so anyways, this works fine still. So 1 2 3, and when you click then 4 has happened. Okay, turns out that if you click again then also 4 is added. Why? Because now earlier 1 2 3 was there, now I added 4. Next time when I click, then it is already 1 2 3 4. I added one more 4. Now here you could use some dynamic numbers also, but right now I'm just so for example, let's say I already know that 3 the length is 3, right? So the length is 3, then let's say whatever length plus 1 I want to add. So you can use something like nums dot length plus 1. If you do something like this, then you can see that 3 is there, then 4 will be added, and then 5 will be added, and 6 will be added. Anyways, whatever you are doing, that is fine. The main idea is that I am modifying the nums, and when I'm modifying, then this list getting is also getting re-rendered. Okay, let's see the DOM. So in the DOM we see that yeah, it looks like 1 2 3 is there. When I click, then you see that this fourth item is added. When I click, then it's what is getting highlighted, actually that is like the diff which React Virtual DOM made, and it changed only that part of the DOM rather than recreating and reinserting the whole DOM. It is just changing that part, and that's why you see that that thing is happening when you add. Okay, now again, you could have done something like this also, that rather than adding in front, rather than adding at the last, you could have added in front, something like this. Okay, this would have also worked, right? So when I click, then 4 is added, then 5 is added, then 6 is added, and each item is added at the at most at actually the most beginning of the list. Okay, however, let's see the DOM again. So UL is there, 1 2 3 is there, that is fine. Now when I add, then you see that everything is modified. Why that is happening? Did you observe this? When I was clicking, then earlier when I was inserting at end, then only the last part was modified, but when I click, then everything is modified, everything is rendered, right, reinserted into the DOM. You can see the whole thing, and when I click again, then you can see the whole thing. When I click again, then you can see the whole thing. Why this thing is happening? This is where the key thing comes into picture. Even if you can see that there is no warning, and there is no warning because I have added I, right? But now you should understand in depth that how this using I is creating the problem. What is happening is that when you are doing something like this, then you are saying, so initially, let's start from the beginning. Initially you are saying that this key is 0. That's what you did, right? I means index, so 0 index, 1 index, 2 index. So you are saying that its key is 0, its key is 1, its key is 2. Okay, now while re-rendering, what React sees is that whenever the key is different, okay, then it is going to re-render. When key is going to be same and the data is also same, then it will not re-render. If key is same and data is different, then again it is going to render. So essentially it tries to optimize that. I know that whatever key is there and whatever element data is there, right? If everything is same, then why I should re-render? That's why it does not. But right now, and let's start from the beginning. When I was doing this at the end, then what was happening? So you can see that what was happening when it was at the end. You see what was happening, that now this this thing has key 0, this thing has key 1, this thing has key 2, 0 1 2. When I inserted, when I clicked again, and the next time when the loop ran, then 1 2 3 still had 0 1 2, and this 4 has now key 3. So React sees that this was earlier also 0, or this was earlier also 1, this was earlier also 2, and the data is also same, right? So why to bother? And this means that nothing has changed here. So only 4 with key 3, that is only being inserted. Okay, but you see that when I do something like this at the beginning, right, then what is happening is that now I'm saying to the React that, you know what, the first time when it was rendered, this has key 0, this has key 1, this has key 2, but now as soon as I clicked, then now 4 is inserted at the beginning, which means now 4 has now what is the array? 4 1 2 3. So now 4 has index 0, 1 has index 1, 2 has index 2, and 3 has index 3, which means that 1 2 3 had 0 1 2 indices, and later after clicking this thing, you can see that everything is changing because now 1 2 3 has indices 1 2 3 rather than 0 1 2. and this 4 has got the index 0, and because of that it sees that everything has changed. Everything has changed. So 4 with 0, this is completely new thing, that's why I have to insert that. Now this with index 1, earlier it was 2, but now with index 1 I see it is 3. Sorry, with index 1 now it is 1. Earlier with index 2 it was 3, but now with index 2 it is 2. So this is also changing, right? Earlier this thing was having index 2, but now it is having index 3. So everything is changing, and that's why react cannot optimize. React cannot optimize, and that's why you can see that everything is changing. And this is where the problem comes. There are more problems which we will see later, but this is one of the basic things that you should avoid this, right? But anyways, if we are not having some internal state inside this, and some a few more renderings has happened, right, then no problem, right? We'll see one problem where in later, where if these components internally have states, this is a separate component internally have, then there might be some other problems, but right now it works, right? So even if some extra re-rendering is there, that should not be a problem. Okay, however, let's firstly try to resolve this issue, and then we'll see another issue. So how we can do that? I was saying that rather than creating your own key, like based on index, the best thing would be that the data itself has its own keys, which means that rather than plain 1 to 3, what if every item is a JSON? JSON means some object, okay, and that object is properly saying that what is the id is, let's say, 0. It can be string, in fact it should be string, but even if you provide okay, so I'll speak about it later. Keys should be string, but if you provide numbers or something, automatically it will convert that to string, so that is fine. But my data, so let me remove this id. Firstly, let's see data 1 2 3 was there, right? Now I am saying that data 1 will be like this, which means that earlier 1 2 3 was directly available. Now 1 2 3 is available inside an object. And why I have put inside an object? Because I want to put my manual id. So let's say 0 1 2 or anything. You can put it in a string also, but let's simply put it in numbers, because when I use this id as keys, then automatically React will convert that to string. Now this is the thing. Now when I am iterating through nums, and now it should not be called nums, it should be called items. So what we can do is that we can call it set items rather than set nums, and this should be called items. But anyways, names should not bother. Let's keep it num only. You can change this also to item, but yeah. But the point which I was making is that now they have their own id. So rather than using this index, what I will do is that I have my own id, and now this num is not num, rather it is an item, and this is item dot data, the actual data which is being printed. And instead of I will use item dot id as my key, and this is perfect. And now I don't need this I thing. Okay, so that is the part of the first render. So now you can see that the first render works perfectly. What about the click? Once we click, then yeah, let's firstly take the simple scenario of inserting later. Yeah, so it's like now we can't add simply a number, right? So a similar thing has to be added like here. And what would be that similar thing? So 0 1, yeah, so what should be it? It should be like something like whatever the nums length is there, let's keep this. So nums dot length, and this should be nums dot length plus 1. Why I'm doing this? For simplicity, because right now the length is 3. What I want is the next item, the id should be 3, because nums dot length is 3, and the data should be 4 nums dot length. So just you can have any random data, but I'm just giving this example for now. And now when you see, then you see that this works fine. Okay, now the difference is that now key is properly defined in the data itself, and that is the expected behavior. In fact, if you see any data in like any JSON placeholder or anything, always you will see some data is there, some ID is there, sorry. You will see that any of the REST APIs, you will see always, you will see that some ID will be there. In fact, you should use that data of inside the ID as the key. So whatever is ID, that you can, ID means what? It is a unique identifier for this row. That is what we want, right? Now let's see the advantage. So the advantage might not be clear here because it was already working fine, right? This thing was already, the problem was when we inserted at the beginning. Okay, so let's do that. Instead here, let's insert in the front. Let's try running that. Now you see that, yeah, 3 items are there, that is fine. Now when I click 4, then you see that now just the first one is modified. When I click and I insert 5, then you see that just 5 is modified. And now why there is no problem, why everything is not rendered again? Because now React knows that even if 1 is here, its key is still 0, because now I'm taking from ID, now I'm not taking from index. So the date inside the data, the key is the ID is still 0, which means that the key is still 0. So the IDs are not changing. You can see the IDs of anything is not changing. Right now, the ID of this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. If I click, then the new thing has ID 5, and rest of all the IDs are same. And that's why you can see that the React can do the optimization rather than rendering the whole thing. It can just see that what to render and what not to render. Okay, that should be fine. Now and again, like for simplicity, you could have so just printing 1 to 3 does not look good, so you could have done something like item like this. Rather than 1 to 3, just print item like this. And here also you could have done something like yeah, let's say item like this, right? And now it is like 1 to 3. Let's keep it like this only. Okay, item. Okay, so what is happening is that okay, so already here item is being added, so here I don't need to add it. Okay, so that is fine. So now it will not be added twice. Yeah, so 1 2 3 4 5 6, anyways. So either this would be done, or you could have done what I was doing earlier. This was fine, but rather than doing here, instead in the original thing only, we could have had something like this. So this was also fine, right? 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, so this works right now. So everything what I have discussed till now, the same thing, exactly the same thing, will work with class components also, because we have not discussed any concept which is specific to functional component. The same thing will work on class components also. Just to show you, let's try to do something on the class component also, a similar thing. But rather than creating our own data, let's load data from somewhere. So let's say some JSON placeholder, some mock data will load and we'll render that, just for example. So let's change this greeting to greeting2, so that now we are in class component. Okay, right now nothing is there, that is fine. But now we want to get some data and we want to render it. And let's do something like this, that initially there's no data, and when I click a button, then the data is loaded, which means that I have a button. Okay, and let's say load data or load users. We'll use an API where we'll load users. Okay, now what is this users? So users will be let's say users will be, let's say, use state. Initially it will be null or empty array. Empty array is also fine. And what we can do is that users can be there. And okay, so firstly you cannot write like this in functional component. It is not functional component, right? So you have to write it somewhere. Okay, first of all, you don't have to use state. Sorry, this is like class component, right? So you have to use yeah, constructor you can use, right? So constructor props, and then you can use super props, and then inside this you can start your state. So let's say users, and then you start with something. So let's say initially empty array is there. That is fine. We'll load this, we'll change this to something once somebody clicks it. Okay, but right now it is just plain and simple this thing, right? Let's try to load this data. So in JSON placeholder there, I believe there is some users API also. Yeah, so we'll take this and load this. Now how do we load this? So let's say some on click we are going to call some function. So let's say load users. We are going to load users on click, right? And we can define this here. So load users we can define. And how we are going to define? We can have, let's say, const resp is equal to await fetch. And again we are using await, so we should use async function. Okay, now we have got response, but the idea is that we have to also get data. So data will be the users list. Okay, and that will be resp.json. Now we have got the users. We simply have to update the users variable, users state variable, and that we can simply do like this. Okay, so we have set the users, we have got the users. So essentially it will, this fetch request will load this data, and initially the users array was empty. After this function is running, after that users array will be this whole array. It is just a bunch of users, I think 10 users. You can see 10 users, and it has a bunch of data. Let's only take username and email for now. Okay, so we'll take only username and email and print them. But let's see how to print them. So like earlier we were printing, similarly here also we'll print. And now there we were printing list. Here for the sake of some differentiation, let's create a table. Okay, so you can do something like table. Inside table you can have tbody. Inside tbody you can have tr and td. Okay, so this is a row, in a table row, and inside that you have two tds. Okay, one td is having your okay, so firstly this is going to be one item. This is going to be one item, right? Rather than one item, I have to, what I have to do, I have to loop through and again so you can understand that right now if I print, let's say any one user, so let's say Alex, and any one email, let's say alex@gmail.com, right? Then you can see that this thing is printed. Okay, but this is not I want, right? What I want is that when the data is loaded, then the whole data should be iterated and printed. So that is what we are doing in this video, right? Rendering lists. So rather than this, what we are going to do is that we are going to iterate over this users. So this dot there should be curly braces because now we are going to JavaScript mode. This dot state dot users, and on that we are going to do a map. So users, initially it was empty array, so this map will not run, but when users we have set here, then this map will run on each of the users, each of the user object, which means that each of the each of the item will be this thing. Okay, and in that we will have ID also, we will have username also, we will have email also. Okay, so those things. So essentially what we are going to do is that one user will be given, one user object will be given in that, and in that we are going to render this thing. This thing we are going to render, right? And this will be plain and simple tr and td. Okay, now what is this? Let's make it from the user. So user dot I think it will be username. Okay, and then this will be user dot email, because these are the fields available on the user object, right? Username and email. As you can see that username and email, these two are the things available. Now ID is also there, right? And then since ID is already there, I don't need to put now I need to put key. You understand why? Because now this is rendered again and again multiple times, right? And this is basically a list, an array of these elements, right? So each of this element, the outermost of this thing should have a key thing, otherwise again we'll get warning. So here we should have some key. Now I don't want to use index because I already have ID, unique ID. So why don't use that? That would be much better, right? So now you can see that we have done this, right? Now when what will happen? So initially you can see that nothing is happening, right? Okay, so null, cannot read properties of null. Okay, so initially users okay, so this dot users will not be there. Actually this is wrong. Actually we have to initialize state, right? And that state will be we are initializing state, not some field this dot users, right? And that state should be users. Okay, and that should be empty array. Okay, so now you can see that this is working fine. Now when I click on this load users, then so right now nothing is printed. Why? Because this state dot users is essentially just empty array, right? And that's why nothing is printed. As soon as I click on load users, then this function will run, and this is going to and this you understand that this is arrow function. Why this is arrow function? Because we are using this inside this. If it is arrow function, then this will automatically work, right? Otherwise you have to bind it. Okay, so here you have to bind it, or in constructor you have to bind it. If you use arrow function, then no need to do anything, right? And that's why I'm using arrow function. Okay, so when I click on load users, then this code will run, and now my users will modify. Why my users will modify? Then the whole data which is from here, you can see that everything is printed. Okay, so you can see the first one is bread, and the last one is, I believe, this Moria, right? So you can see that thing is there. So the data from there is loaded. Okay, it is not there initially, and when I click, then that data is loaded. Now this is the special use case for us, right? You could have had some other use case, and that is also fine, which means that let's say rather than clicking on the button, there is no such button, just on the component did mount you want to do this. Okay, which means that the whole thing is done on automatically as soon as the component is loaded. So component did mount, and there you want to do this. Just a small thing you have to do is that since await you are using, so you have to use async in front of component did mount, right? And that is also fine. And now you can see that as soon as the page is loaded, then only this whole thing is running. This whole thing is running, and as soon as the component is loading, the data is fetched and loaded. Okay, so that might be your requirement. Anyways, now now you understand that how to use arrays inside JSX and how you can render them. Okay, just wanted to show you one final thing. Let's go back to the component style thing which we were doing earlier. Right now it is there. uh, one more thing I wanted to show you, that what can happen sometimes. So let's say this thing, each of the item which is being rendered, this thing, let's say that this thing is some component in itself. And why I'm trying to create a component in itself, because I want to show you the idea of state. Okay, so just in a bit it will be clear. Let's have a simple function which is list item, and that function will render a simple JSX, this JSX, and instead of this we are using list item. And obviously key is not needed here, rather key is still needed there, because that is the outermost JSX on which the iteration is going on. Okay, so this is still here but this is just item.id, right? I still need my item.data, but that item dot data, I can pass item, or directly I can pass data also, right? So why not pass directly data, which means that I can do something like this here: data is equal to item dot data directly here, which means that now directly in the props dot data I will have my item dot data, and that I can use here. And you can see that still the same behavior will be there. It is working fine. But why I did this small transformation, because now I wanted to show you that what if this thing has some internal state in it. What do you mean by state? Which means that let's say there is some sort of checkbox here. So this thing is there, in front of that let's say some checkbox is there, input with type checkbox. So now you understand the idea is to have some checkbox like this, and let's put some space in between, so we can have some span with something like this, NBSP, non-breakable space. Okay, so this is fine, and it looks like bullet points are no more needed. So for the time being, let's remove them. What we had list style none, right? Yeah, so it works, right? But now the idea is that what we want to do is that there is a state which is controlling this behavior. So you can see that now also this checkbox is working, but this is not controlled in some state. What do I mean by that? Which means that this is also working fine, but this state, so right now when I clicked, then this is checked, right? But this checked thing is not in our control. This is like internal to DOM, right? If let's say we want to do some validation before doing check, or let's say some condition is met, then only do check, otherwise don't do check. So let's say if number of items is 1, then don't do check. Those sort of things we cannot do, because this is now just property of state. Later we'll learn about controlled and uncontrolled components, but the basic idea I'm giving you, that right now this thing checked and unchecked is a property of the DOM. I want to control that, and that is done using our own variable, which means that rather than depending on DOM, we are having our own checked thing, which means that checked is equal to some checked variable, but this checked variable is our own variable. Okay, and we can have a use state or something. So let's say const checked set checked is equal to use state, and let's say initially it is false, and on click I can change it. On click, some click handler is there. Let's say simply handler is there, and this handler I can define myself. And what I can say is that just toggle the toggle the whatever the checked variable is there, I just want to toggle it when you click on that. And now you can see that on change. Okay, so I think some spelling mistake is there. On not on click, right? On for input tag you have to have on change. Yeah. Okay, so you can see that this is there, but now when I click and when I don't click, then whether this is going to be checked or not, that whole thing is being controlled from here. From here you can see that if I comment this, then even if I click, then you can see that nothing is happening, because now the whole thing, whether this is going to be checked or not checked, that is in our control rather than just DOM control, right? Because if we give the control to DOM, then we don't have we don't have control over that, right? So we don't want that. This is a special type of thing which is called controlled component. It's just a buzzword, but essentially the point I have to told you, right, that I will discuss separately in some separate video. But the idea you are basically understanding that right now it is in my control. So you can see that this thing is happening. What I wanted to show you is something interesting. You see that let's say the whole thing. So again, the component which I have written is a separate component. If you want, you could create a separate file for it, but for our purpose, for simplicity, I have created another component in the same file. Okay, so that is also fine. But let me show you one thing. Let's say instead of item.id, I somehow just used index. This is bad thing, but why it is bad thing, I'm giving a second example. One example I already gave you, right, where we saw that unoptimized rendering was happening. But right now I will show you, but that time also the rendering was unoptimized, but the UI was working fine. Here I'll show you an example where actually the UI will be also having some problems, because if you're since you're using a key as the index, and we'll discuss why that is happening. Now you see that if I do something like this, then till now, yeah, I checked on, let's say, item 2, I clicked, item 4, I clicked, it looks like it is working fine, right? Let's do a separate thing. Let's move it to up, which means that now new items are added at the top rather than at the bottom. Let's do the same thing. I have checked on item 2, I click, and you can see that now the checked item has become item 1 rather than item 2. If I click again, then you can see that the now checked item is item 4. So you can see what is happening. From the top, the second one is checked, no matter what I am adding. And this is not the expected behavior. This is not the expected behavior, right? This is like completely wrong. And this is where you have to understand that in most of the scenarios, you will get away with using index as key. But whenever possible, try to use your own ID if the data is available, right? And when your thing which is rendering, right, this thing, if this has its own internal state, then definitely you should not use something like this. You can understand the problem. The problem is that React is trying to understand that, yeah, whatever the thing which has, so right now you can see that this is 2, this is 2, right, item 2. I have said that, yeah, this item 2 is now checked. Okay, so this item 2 is checked, that is fine, that React is understanding. But actually it is not, it cannot understand what is item 2. It understands this item 2 thing only using key. And what is the key right now? The key is index. What is the index? The index is 1. So essentially React is understanding that the item, whatever this thing is there, at index 1 is checked. And when you add, then the whole problem is that React still thinks that the item at index 1 is checked, but index 1 is now not this, but right now this. And that's why the whole problem is happening. You can understand? and that's why the whole re-rendering problem is also, and now state was there. Then when a state is there, then this is additional problem, and this is like a bigger problem which we don't want to have, right? And that's why when you see that rather than using index or something, if you simply use item dot data, not data, sorry, it was id, right? Id, what we want to do, id is the key. Okay, so now if you use something like this, then you're going to see that if I check item 2 and then whatever I click does not matter, item 2 is only checked, because now this is completely independent, right? Item 2 has id 1. Now whatever items I'm adding, its id is something different, right? So there is no conflict, and that's why this thing is working fine. So this was the final, last but definitely not the least example which we gave, which is very important. That's why you should not use the indices as the keys. But most of the times you'll get away with using keys. But whenever possible, please try to use IDs if it is already available. Okay, so that should be fine. I think by now you must have understood that what is how to render lists in React. One final thing I will also highlight, that whatever these keys we are trying to put it, I told that yeah, this should be unique. A couple of times I've used this unique. This is not globally unique. You understand? Which means that you can very well have something like this, like 2 times. Let's say a list is there, right? And then this is not an issue at all. This is a completely fine thing. Why? Because the keys don't have to be globally unique. Keys have to be unique only with respect to siblings. So a particular array is being rendered, then for all the items relative to that array, this should be unique. So all the only siblings of that array should be unique. Globally, so here index 2 is being used. Here also index 2 is being used. That is fine. But again, in this only, if two items have index key 2, then that is a problem. Then that is a problem. Okay. But here also key 2, here also key 2, here also key 1, here also key 1. That is fine at all. Okay. So anyways, that would be all for this video. See you in the next one.